Japan's a wealthy country, but if you talk to young Japanese in general, what's their future going to be like? And many of them, hopefully, it'll stay the same. Eiichi, back 100 years ago, was expressing his concern. The reason why you do the right thing is because that way it's sustainable. The biggest risk, some people are just thinking about themselves and not the others. It's not about the past, but it's about the present. Why do we have terrorism? Why do we have conflict? It's because of the have and the have-nots, right?
Hello, and thank you for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show, subscribing is the best way to support us. It helps us grow and bring you new stories from life in Japan. All right, let's jump in. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we have the pleasure to welcome Ken Shibusawa. Thank you so much for coming.
No, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great.
You're the founder and CEO of Shibusawa and Company,
Yes.
and a few other very interesting ventures. You're also the great grandson of
Yes.
Eiichi Shibusawa,
Yeah.
who's commonly regarded as the father of capitalism in Japan.
Yeah.
And for those of you that want to get a picture of him, you can take out one of the more recent 10,000 yen
That's right, yeah.
bills, and he's going to be on there. And his legacy is kind of also still kind of part of what you do in a way. So we have
I kind of found my way into it actually, but
Oh, well, we can get
Okay.
into that in
Okay.
a little bit. So you were born and raised in Japan, but then at a relatively young age, you moved to the United States.
Right. So I was made in Japan, but I'm the product of the American public education system from second grade all the way up through college. So
What was it like for you at such a young age to move overseas and kind of study in a very different environment?
well, I mean, I was 7 or 8 years old, and so I got thrown into this local school. And I saw my parents talking to the teacher, and they were about to leave. So I thought, oh gosh, I get to go home with my parents. And the teacher goes, no. And I said, you guys are like keeping me here. And it's like, so I would imagine the first 2 years I kind of lived in this world of imagination where people are probably saying this, but maybe not.
So you didn't really speak
Not a word.
not a word of English.
Not a word.
Whereabouts in the United States?
This was a place called Yonkers, which is it's a commuter distance from New York, Manhattan. Yeah, Where my father used to work for the Bank of Tokyo, and so he got transferred, and the family went. So
Okay.
yeah,
So you did your whole kind of education in the United States up until university,
yeah.
where you studied, I believe, biomechanical engineering or something along the lines of
Chemical engineering.
Chemical
engineering with a focus on bioengineering back at the time. But yeah.
When did you decide to come back to Japan?
Well,
Because you have your whole education there, you have a degree from the United States, and I imagine a lot of interesting and exciting opportunities there as well.
yeah. So this was back in the 1980s. As I was graduating, like in Japan, you have this big recruitment sort of thing process
Every spring, right?
Yeah, but in the U.S. you just kind of graduate and you're out, getting your job. And I had the choice of remaining in school for higher education in master's or PhD in the discipline, but I thought, no more schooling for me. But at the time, Japan was a very exciting where a lot of things are happening. So I thought, well, why don't I just sort of kind of rediscover my roots and come back to Japan for a while. So there is a phrase in Japanese called furita, which means you're a free will and you're not working for anybody, and so
Kind of floating around and going from place to place, gathering.
yeah. So that just sort of floated back here to Japan. But my uncle on my mother's side of the family said that, well, you probably should be not floating around. So why don't you work at my organization, which was called the Japan Center for International Exchange, JCIE. And it still exists. And it was established back in 1970. It was one of the first private sector NGO international relations. So it's more policy dialogue. But that's a time when everybody wanted to learn about Japan. so it was kind of an interesting time.
And you had that experience of kind of having been overseas and being able to easily bridge a little bit these.
Yeah, that's when I thought, well, it's kind of bridging the two cultures, Japan and, well, primarily U.S. back then, but with not just U.S. but Europe, Asia. Sounded like a kind of interesting thing. So I thought, but it was my uncle's organization, so I was there just for for just a little bit, and not thinking that I would be building my career there. But I noticed this delegation from New York, and these couple of young professionals who were probably 3 or 4 or 5 years senior to me, and they work for firms like Goldman Sachs, Salomon Brothers, and they were so cool, and thought, wow, these guys are like, and I figured out you have to go to business school to get into these firms. And I was looking at some, we didn't have internet back then, but just looking at some materials. And seems like to me the investment bank industry pays a lot better than the nonprofit NGO sector. So I thought, maybe I should check that out. So I transitioned from the nonprofit sector through the MBA to the extreme profit sector.
And starting from chemical engineering as well. So
yeah. Well, I kind of left behind the chemical engineering in school, basically.
Did you have a kind of reverse culture shock moving back here after so many years abroad?
I did, because now I was the reverse, where I was growing up in an environment where my parents would speak to us. I have 2 younger sisters, in Japanese. We would answer it back in English, and I would speak with my siblings in English. All my friends are in English. Actually, Texas. You might catch a little bit of a Texas twang, because that's where I grew up. But so now I had the reverse, where when I came back to Japan, that my Japanese wasn't as fluent as it should be for a 23-year-old. I could understand, speak a little bit, couldn't write at all.
No kanjis.
But I could read because my uncle would send me manga.
Okay.
Yeah, and so Shonen Sunday, Shonen Jump, and all these things. So I was able to read. But interesting enough, that's when first in Japan this concept of wapuro, which means word processing, first came to the market, and so that you could type with romaji English, translate that into phonetic Japanese, push a button, and it'll change into the kanji, right?
So that was good timing.
So, yeah, I didn't use it that much, but it was that timing where you could express yourself without being able to write. You could just type it.
So the language was one challenge. Culturally speaking, was there anything
culturally,
that you kind of?
Yeah, well, one is I live in Shibuya, and everybody's seen The Crossing. It's basically the same scene from 30, 40, 50 years ago. People are like all over the place. And I grew up in Texas, where if you want to go from A to B, you walk straight, and you walk one speed, and you got there. But at The Crossing, it's like so many people, right? So that was a shock. And then of course I would be asked this question. It says, Ken-san or Shibusawa-san, which do you like better, United States or Japan? That kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, I kind of like both, and I have issues with both, and so I had this identity crisis for a long, long time. But after living in Japan for a couple of, I think it was after a couple of months or years, I forget, but I came to this realization that, now, did I want to be an American that just knew about America? The answer is no. Did I want to be a Japanese that knew just about Japan? The answer is no. I thought, I'm okay the way I am. And so that actually kind of lifted a lot of the baggage that I was carrying on my shoulder at that time.
So you in Japan after university, you work a little bit for a nonprofit, but then you see an opportunity for you to kind of go into a career in finance, in investment banking. Was this also then a complete new change for you, something you discovered, or something you quickly got really into?
I wanted to go into finance because trying to gap between Japan and America, you could go into trade or finance or something, or different areas. But that's when the bubble was happening, and so there's a lot of money going back and forth. And initially, I was interested in a portion of the investment banking industry that did corporate finance and M&A. because they seem like the bank, because those are the people that I saw. They seem really cool. But during my summer internship in Japan, a company called back then Morgan Guarantee Trust Company of New York, which is now JP Morgan, I got my summer job at summer internship on the market side, and which was more, buy and sell, buy and sell, buy and sell.
Very dynamic.
Yeah,
high pressure, I imagine. As
well. Yeah. Well, both are high pressure, but it's a total kind of different sort of same organization, totally different, corporate cultures in a sense. And it was sort of fun, and so I found myself kind of shifting from the investment banking side because they're so what's the right word for it? A little bit up on themselves. They're sort of like, because they're bankers, right? Okay. And I was coming from the nonprofit sector. I knew nothing about finance, and so it was kind of a big hurdle in a sense to get on that side of the business. Where the market side is like, yeah, it's come on, you can do it. So I found myself on the market side. And so at JP Morgan, I was in the on the Japanese yen interest rates. It's called JGBs, Japanese government bonds, derivatives, options. Then I went to do currency options, and then I changed job to Goldman Sachs on the equity side, equity derivatives. But the reason I changed is because I wanted to go. I was interested in this industry called the hedge fund industry.
Okay.
Now back in the late 80s, when I was joining the industry, that was when a lot of the it was called, Japan money was just, being invested globally, mostly in the United States. Boom. Yeah. And they were a big presence in the financial markets. But after 1990, the bubble burst, and then that presence started to wane. And as I was seeing this other industry, this entity that's the market was talking about, and it was these hedge funds. And I was like, initially I was like, what are these? What are these funds? I've never heard of this company before. I was told by my senior manager, they manage money for rich people. And I was like, okay. But then I started engaging with this one particular hedge fund, and I was really impressed because they were in New York, following multiple markets. I was in Japan following the Japanese market. And that person in New York was following more detailed data about Japan than I was. And I thought, that's not right. In a sense, I was kind of a little bit of sense of pride that, I'm here, working here, I should know more. And so we had this really good relationship where he was asking information and I would try to give him information more than he was, was looking for. And I really got interested in the hedge funds because initially it was about the size of the transactions that attracted attention because they're traded in big size. But leading up to it, I understood that there's lots of research going on before they actually trade execution. And so I wanted to learn more about these hedge funds. And I thought, wow, maybe I can work at a hedge fund. And so I asked my client back then, how about working on that side? But this was back in 1994. Where the Federal Reserve back then started increasing interest rates really, really rapidly, and the hedge fund industry was not doing well. And he was saying, it's not a good time for hedge funds right now, but I'll introduce you to a friend at Goldman Sachs who knows a lot about hedge funds. And that person basically said, why don't you just come work for us? And I said, but a person named Eric, I don't know anything about equities. And he goes, it's all the same. I said, okay. And then the second phrase he says, and Ken, if you try something and if you think it's not your thing, you can always go back to what you're doing before. And I thought, that's true. And so I made this leap from the equity side, the fixed income currency side to the equity side. From the outside world, it seems like it's the same. The guy said it was the same, but it's kind of a different animal in terms, it's a different zoo, I guess. So
this financial world can become like very complex, and you mentioned that behind every transaction goes a lot of research, and also I imagine sort of interpretation of this research.
Yes.
Did you notice throughout your time kind of balancing between the United States and Japan different approaches, like philosophically speaking, about like how to understand the financial markets, where Japanese companies, Japanese investments firm acting differently and looking at things differently than the counterparts in the United States?
Well, particularly it's a global macro hedge fund. The detail and the breadth, I mean, not just like the top line data, but what was supporting that data, basically. And they wanted to know not what's coming out in this number, but what was it in the past? What's the trend? What's the future? And I was asked very many detailed questions, and I didn't have the answer, so I'd go to my economics department right before any large. Because the way the markets moved, especially back then, was there's an announcement of an economic indicator, and the markets will move, prior. And so before, there are predictions on what that number will be, and the market players tend to position themselves accordingly, right? And I was asked many detailed questions, so I would go to my economics department, and they were just like, Shibusawa, nobody's asking me these questions, and it wasn't me, but it was because of that particular client back then. And so I found the analysis on this particular case to be much broader, much deeper than the traditional or the usual, let's say, people traded here in Japan.
There's also the kind of discussion about like risk acceptance. And I mean, investments can be high risk. And in Japan, it's commonly discussed that Japanese people are generally more risk averse, and they try to kind of go this more stable, slower path forward. Is this something you've noticed in these kind of final decisions, where maybe on the Japanese side of the conversation, it was more like, oh, maybe let's not go down this path, or was it kind of not too different?
Sure. I think in the end, whether you're Japanese, American, European, basically the genetic, composition is the same, basically. But the environment that individual grows up in or works in actually changes, right? And then I think it's in Japan. It's like, but especially back then, it was lifetime employment, right? Because you joined a company, insurance company, bank, you stayed for life. Not really life, but during your sort of productive years, basically, right? Whereas in the U.S., people are more not freelancing, but they were able to change jobs, accordingly to opportunities, right? And so that's a totally different environment. Where if you feel like you're stuck in one, what's the downside? Well, being kicked out. You don't want to be kicked out, so you kind of go with the flow. On this side, being kicked out is not good, but then this person is always looking for the next opportunity. So there's the risk reward sort of parameter on both ends, on the either ends. Is totally different, right? And so I think that's one big difference. Just the way the working environment and the working culture of the two different societies. Having said that, though, it's not like Japan doesn't take risk because you live here. I mean, there's earthquakes, typhoons, and usually people say, oh, Japan is a more of an agricultural culture, and the Western are more hunters, and so they're risk. But if you think about it, agriculture is very risky. You're stuck there. You can't move, and whether it rains, pours, drought, you're there. But if you're a hunter, you go where the prey is. You can move around. So which side is taking more risk? But maybe it's this side.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
you had a 20-something year career in finance, basically peak capitalism.
Yeah.
And I mean, your family history kind of is very important there too. Your Eiichi Shibusawa, who kind of is coined to be the father of capitalism in Japan, brought some of these. He established, I think, the Bank of Japan.
First bank in Japan.
Which is now Mizuho,
yes,
I believe.
Mizuho, yes.
As well as many other entities that are operating today and kind of the foundation of the system. Throughout all this time for you working in finance, did you ever kind of think back about your family history and his approach to capitalism, which was quite different perhaps than what, for example, Adam Smith established in the West, more for-profit versus your great-great-grandfather, who was talking a lot about morals in capitalism.
Well, in the story so far, up until my 30s, no, because like if I knew about my great-great-grandfather before I went to the U.S. I read books. Then I had known that he started many, almost 500 companies and whatnot. That he was father of Japanese capital, all that kind of stuff. But I was growing up in the U.S., where the name Shibusawa Eiichi meant nothing. Then I came back to Japan, and it was like, in this world of kill what you eat what you kill, basically, kind of that kind of capitalism environment. And so that's nothing that Shibusaichi was never in that sort of that, that in my conscious in that sense. But there was something that always sort of bugged me a little bit, was the fact that so my great-great-grandfather started about 500 companies in Japan. Many of them that still exist today. But for some reason, his great-great-grandson doesn't own a single share. And I think,
interesting.
Like, it's like, well, yeah, interesting. And I was thinking, like, bummer. but then I thought, well, Eiichi Shibusawa was that kind of a person. So I understood it, but it was like, bummer. But when I started my own company in 2001, that's when I started to rediscover Shibusawa Eiichi. And I found that he had left a treasure of assets. And what that asset was his words. It was there in the archives all these years, and I had never bothered or thought about looking into it. I had read books where some of the other people had went to the original archives and wrote about it, but I found out that his words were still in the archive, not on the internet. This like thick books, and I thought, wow, as I said, my Japanese reading is okay, but okay in terms of the present day Japanese, and this was like Japanese 100 over 100 years ago, and it's like it's the kanji's different, the expressions are different,
handwriting style as well.
Yeah. And so it was a struggle, but I asked my father to translate the Japanese into Japanese back then, and then I was reading it, and I'm like, gosh, this is something that's not about the past, but it's about the present.
What are some of those key teachings, key words that really struck with you?
Well, I mean, so he's known for Rongo and Soroban. Rongo is the teachings of Confucius. So this is morality. It's about, caring for others, humanity, all that. And the abacus, Soroban is the abacus, and so it's the original handheld calculator. So this represents business, and that these two should be integrated, and not an or, but an and. It is the way Eiichi expressed it. So that's the most famous word, right? But if you just take it at that surface, it kind of seems like, well, gosh, you have to do good, not bad, when you try to make money. Which is yeah, that's what it says. But if you delve deeper, what it's saying is basically that, to be for the wealth to be sustainable. Of course, you need to know about the the business, the soroban part, but to be sustainable, you need to be thinking. He's used the word in Japanese "tadashii dori," which means
the right way.
Doing the right way. Doing the right thing. And the reason why you do the right thing is because it that way it's sustainable. If you think about making just for yourself today, not caring for what others are, well, you might make money today, but other people aren't going to be thinking good about you. In a very simple example. And so for the next round, well, I don't want to talk to Ken because he's only thinking about himself.
This is kind of a stark contrast with what feels like is happening in this financial world as well, where the companies, especially nowadays, if we look at the very large companies, are prioritizing profit growth at the expense of many other people, including sometimes their own employees.
Yeah. So that part of it, the have and the have-nots, is something that Eiichi back in 100 well, not 150, about 100 years ago, was expressing his concern. That's the tadashi dori, doing the right thing. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. So you're kind of, Toby, what you're saying is that maybe the capitalism as it exists, as we see, the biggest risk probably is what you just said, where some people are just thinking about themselves and not the others. Why do we have terrorism? Why do we have conflict in the world? It's because of the have and the have-nots, right? Why do we have divide in the United States, which is the most richest, most advanced country in the world? It's because there are people that felt they are being left behind.
So this change, this look into his philosophy came when you established your own company in 2001. What was the decision behind kind of leaving the big banking companies to start something of your own?
Well, I was turning 40 years old, and I thought I'm reaching the halfway point of my life, and I was thinking I haven't done anything. So I had this sort of midlife crisis, sort of my early stage of midlife crisis. And then up until then, I was looking on the investment side of the fund. But actually, it's a fund, so a fund needs to raise money for the fund to operate, right? To invest in. And there's some early stage discussions about, well, maybe Japanese institutional investors can invest in the fund as an investor. Some preliminary sort of discussions. I thought, that's sort of interesting. That's true. And Japanese institutional investors should be diversifying their portfolio for just traditional bonds and stocks and real estate, but the other asset classes. And hedge fund is as an investment. It's an alternative investment. So that's when I thought, well, and there were some in the early days where some of the institutional investors in some pension funds were starting to look at alternative investments. So I thought, well, maybe that's something that I could start doing on my own. Oh. Now, until I joined the hedge fund, I thought in the finance industry, you had to work for big organizations like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. But when I worked at the hedge fund for 5 years, I found that, well, this is a small business. There's the top, a partner, all the others, but it's an organization back then. Not more than 100 people, and so it's basically a small business, but doing very, very big. I felt, impact in the financial markets, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So I thought maybe small companies can have big impact depending on on the angle and sort of the timing and all the other stuff. So up until then, my thought of a career is working for a large organization. But that sort of changed with the hedge fund, and I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. I had probably savings to pay for my I had just gotten married. I had one boy child, and I thought, with my savings, I could probably hang on for 2 years, and if it doesn't work, I say, oh gosh, I'm sorry, please hire me. And so I thought, I had this sort of window that was sort of open, I felt. And I thought, I'll just sort of jump in.
So you tried, or you didn't try, you did establish a company, a sort of new fund for people to diversify their portfolios into kind of
not a fund, but advisory.
Advisory.
So, yeah.
For people to diversify their
for institutional investors, yeah.
Is this something that was common in Japan?
No, at the time, not really, because alternative investments wasn't common at the time.
So what kind of investments were you kind of trying to promote to these institutions?
It was hedge funds, that's where but also venture capital funds and private equity funds. These are called alternative investments. And so I even wrote a book on alternative investments back in 2002 or 3 or 4, I think. Yeah, but...
So when you established this, and this is kind of relatively new, and when some things are new, people are generally a bit more cautious. How do you kind of bring this and introduce these as interesting opportunities to these companies to diversify their portfolios?
You smile and be persistent. but obviously you show the merits of what having alternative asset classes that are uncorrelated with the other asset classes, and there's logic behind it. But of course, institutional investors, they have relatively smart people that think they need to be diversifying their risk and being able to keeping up with what's happening globally, and so there was some reception, not with everybody, but with some of the leading players, and so the leading players tend to be more forward-looking, and risk-taking in that sense. So that was okay. But for 2 years, it didn't look like it was going to go well.
So a struggle.
Yeah. But this one life insurance company agreed to invest in this a medical venture capital fund that I was helping to raise money, and that sort of saved me actually. That saved me. And then around the same time, I was trying to raise money for a fund of funds vehicle with a partner on the West Coast, and that started to take off finally around 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it took about two years of sort of sweating, but something happened though in that process that really I remember more being a turning point in a sense of the way I started to think was actually 6 months after I started my company. I started my company in 2001 March, as I was turning 40. And 6 months later, I was traveling in the United States, and I was staring up at this great blue, clear sky with a heavy cloud in my heart. And the reason why there wasn't a single plane flying in the air, and the reason was the morning of 9/11. I was on the West Coast. I was planning to fly to Washington, D.C. The plane never took off. I was stuck in Seattle for 1 week. No planes took off. And I was looking at the sky. I was like, this is bad. Because like up until then, my working environment, working at a hedge fund, the markets, was you picked up the phone, you tapped on the terminal, and you can move millions, 10 millions, 100 million, billions of dollars, and that kind of stuff, There wasn't a single plane flying. I was like, wow, there's no people moving. There's no goods moving. I can't reach my wife on the phone because the phones wouldn't, this is really bad. And I thought, that's when I thought this concept of peace is like air, in a sense, like when you think you take it for granted, when it's taken away, it's really, really bad. It's a big wake-up call. And then in hindsight, that's this concept of sustainability started to sink in. It's you're doing for yourself today, but what about, I had started a family, started a company. What about 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago now? And so that I started thinking the long term. Just in 9/11, and another part of it, the equation, was the fact that the hedge fund that I worked for, the founder immediately started a donation fund for firefighters, families of firefighters who had lost their lives around the office in Midtown. Because there are fire stations around Midtown as well. And I was asked he asked everybody to pitch in, and of course I did as well. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting, because like this individual, this founder is making more money than all his descendants for many going forward could never spend. So there's a sector in the population that's making so much money. But when there is a really social need, the action is really quick to
supply funds.
Yeah, and I was looking at my working environment in Japan. There's people that work to make money, and there's people that work to have a good society and environment. And if you remember, I initially started on this side.
Yeah.
And back in 1980s, when the Japan was booming, there was a little bit of this connection between bridging of this two environments. But after the last a decade, I guess, but it had severed, and so there's like they're isolated. I thought, well, that kind of bridging is necessary, and so I thought, well, we're raising money from Japan, from institutional investors. If we make money, we get an incentive fee. I asked my partner, the hedge fund of funds that I was working on, could we use 10% of our incentive fees to support social entrepreneurship, which is a word that was started to become wasn't a buzzword yet, but it was starting to. And I thought this concept, entrepreneur social, was kind of interesting. And my partner said, "Oh, that sounds like a good." And so we started this program, which blew up actually with the Lehman financial crisis because the entire fund blew up then. But now is part of what I call the Commons Seed Cap, which is we can get to that later. But the mutual fund that I established later on.
So you had this one event kind of made you reflect and change your direction a little bit.
Yeah.
And come back to Japan and try to approach things differently. Mm-hmm. Also then discovery of your family's historical teachings and so on. How do you then kind of put this into action? How do you implement those changes effectively in an environment where, as you said, you wanted to become the bridge between the kind of financial side and the social side, but they were very disconnected at the time. And in Japan, I'm not sure how the communication was between both sides or how to create that bridge, but not so easy, I imagine.
Yeah, well, initially when we had some funds to deploy to support social entrepreneurship. When we first ran through the program and we went through interviews and they were asking like, where did this money come from? From funds? Really? so there was not I mean, it probably exists in the United States. Like I said, it's a more robust, dynamic ecosystem. But in Japan, people that made money, especially from the financial fund, using portion of that to support social entrepreneurship (NPOs), it didn't exist. And so people are like, really? And so in the NPO sector anyway, that it kind of it was kind of pioneering, I guess, is a word, in that as well. Now, along with the social part, the other part actually that I forgot to mention is that, as I mentioned, I started having children in 2000, 2002, 2003, and 3 boys, and they're babies, very cute. And I thought, wow, man, when they grow up, like, 20, 30 years, they'll be doing something, trying to travel the world, maybe start a company. It's like, in Japanese, you call it oyabaka, like parents being stupid about, their cute little baby, but I thought, well, so maybe I should put aside a little bit of money every month for their future. And I thought, well, I could do savings every month in their name, but it's for their growth, to support their growth. So that's growth capital. And so I thought, so equities. And so I started putting aside a small amount of money every month in my children's name from 2001, basically 2001, 2003, 2003. And this led to the long-term approach to investment, which in 2008, I launched Commons Asset Management with my partners.
So a switch to basically long-term view and this idea of things need to be sustainable, like financial cash flows, capitalism, relationships with others, because otherwise the system doesn't sustain itself.
Right.
You also recently started an initiative to kind of work a lot, fund that supports African startups and companies in Africa. I'm quite curious about how this got started, because this is where we first, I think, briefly interacted at this event a few months ago.
Oh, in Kobe, right, you're right.
And so I'm curious kind of what led you to kind of invest so much in these.
Curiosity initially. So when I was launching Commons Asset Management, this was around 2008, so about 17 some odd years ago. around the same time, so for Commons Asset Management, it's basically a cross-generation, 30-year time horizon, sort of, not investing buy and hold for 30 years, but investing for the next generation. So I was thinking about 30 years, 30 years, 30 years, like. And so I was looking at some data in 2050, and I noticed that Japan had fallen off the population from the top 10. And I see in the list, I think it was number 4. Yeah, number 4. I saw this country, Nigeria, and I thought, Nigeria, really? Then there was like 7 or 8 or 9, Congo, Ethiopia. I was like, really? And then I checked the population currently, and I found out there's almost 100 million people living in the Congo and Ethiopia, and 200 million people living in Nigeria. And I thought, really? And that this population was going to double in the next 30 years. And then for Japan, it was obvious that our population was going to be dwindling. And so I thought, what a perfect combination. Our declining population, their increasing population. There must be some way that, and just like the social sector and the profit sector that I mentioned earlier, totally in different sort of spheres. I mean, there's a little bit of trading back and forth, but Japan has never had the historical relationship with Africa. The trade, and investment, it was there, but it wasn't what we call mainstream, and especially in the financial markets, it was like a blue ocean. Nobody was doing it.
So how do you get into it? Because I imagine with such big populations, there are a lot of interesting opportunities, but as you just mentioned, maybe very little information about it, and maybe some systems and infrastructure not in place. So how do you kind of get into this?
Yeah. So initially that was the curiosity part, and lucky for me, around the same timing in 2009, I was part of this organization called Keizai Doyukai, which is a Japan Association of Corporate Executives, which I joined back in 2002 when I was 41, and all these like people with gray hair, thinking. So it's like what we call in Japanese zaikai. So it's the senior, management of large corporations, and so. But I was asked to join. I said okay, so I joined. But this organization started a Africa committee in 2009, and I thought, oh, that's a good way for me to learn about it. So from 2010, I was I became part of the member and started to learn about Africa. And currently I'm the co-chair of this, what we call now the Middle East Africa Committee. Now, so in the learning process, though in 2022, so several years leading up to 2022, right after the corona, excuse me, we had proposed a policy paper, Keizai Doyukai's Africa Committee, saying that there should be more impact investments into Africa, private public sector initiative. And we announced this at the what we call TICAD, TICAD, which is the Tokyo International Conference on Africa Development, which was a government, Japanese government, 54 heads of state of Africa. So back in 1993, and they used to do it every 5 years, and now it's every 3 years. But in the last decade or so, it's the private sector, businesses has gotten more involved. So it's not just government to government, but it's also business getting involved in this dialogue, and so we proposed that there should be impact investment as a new source of capital from Japan into Africa, and the Africa Development Bank. The prior president Adesina found the concept to be very, very interesting. Said, "Hey, come to our Africa Investment Forum in 2022 November, and we'll have a special Japan session for you guys." And I said, "Okay, sounds good." And so I went, and then basically the vice president Quaynor said, "We would like to co-create this fund with you." And I was saying, like, really? Because it's like it was just not a proof of concept; it was just a concept. But that put wind in the sails. And so at the Keizai Doyukai, they made the endorsement, not the organization starting this fund, but membership of the which are corporate members, that it's okay to start this concept, moving forward to establish a management company for the fund, and currently, the last TICAD, which is this year in Yokohama in August. Prior, we were able to have what we call a pre-close of $25 million with seven corporates coming in. Our final target with the African Development Bank coming in is $100 million, about hopefully from a year and a half from now. But
so historically, not so many connections between Japan and Africa. Now, some connections have been built over the last couple of decades. As you just described, on the top level, countries are collaborating, the governmental banks are collaborating. What do we see like on the ground between Japan and Africa? If you have like some examples of companies that have been able to being established on both sides, or concrete changes?
Well, on the ground level, people in Africa probably have heard the brand like Toyota or seen it. They drive it, and some of the other brands. But usually they don't see the Japanese. They see a lot of Chinese coming in doing construction. Obviously, they've seen the Europeans coming in for centuries. But so in a sense, Japan was not. Some of the footprint was very, very limited. JICA, which is the Japan International Cooperation Agency, they do really good work on the grounds, capacity building in the rural areas included. But in terms of business, certain players like Toyota, and some other companies are there, but basically they don't see us.
Still not so much.
Yeah, but the fact is, the argument that I make to the Africans is that, we don't have much footprint in Africa as other people, but Japan 150 years ago was an emerging country. And we didn't have natural resources like Africa, but we had clean water, trees, but we had a bunch of people. And this is something I mentioned, I think, at the Kobe conference. We had a lot of people, and if you think about it, it's very simplistic probably, but Japan was able to join the ranks of the advanced nations around that time because we invested and engaged in the human capital, because that's all we had. And there was hubris and arrogance, and so invited the horrible years of war. But again, from the ashes, I believe it was this concept of human capital that was able to propel Japan to in the 1980s, when I was joining the job force, as the second largest economy in the world. And so that's Japan's legacy. And what's needed in Africa, I found, is when I first visited the continent, this was in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, back in 2019, not that far ago, just a little bit before the Corona crisis. I was driving through the city in this one part, and I see just a bunch of these young men doing nothing. And I thought, wow, this is bad. Nothing's ever good happens when you see a bunch of unemployed men just hanging around, whether it's Ethiopia, Japan, or anywhere. And so I thought, just the increasing population until then, I thought, it's a future large market, but it's causing problems as well. So, but at the same time, on the afternoon of the same day, I was at a pitch event, and this one individual pitching his company was an AI engineering company. I thought, really? This is back in 2019. AI was still in there, so it was coming on.
Before the GPT.
Yeah. But Africa, Ethiopia, AI, it didn't click. But I thought, well, if 1% of the population is of that caliber in terms of skills, that's 1 million people, which is quite a lot of people. And so that's when I figured, okay, it's the human capital side of the equation that also needs to develop. Unless you see that, you're not going to see the development, the potential of the increasing population. And it's not that Japan has all the answers for human capital engagements, but that's been our legacy, I feel. And so with that legacy, going to Africa and say, hey, let's co-create this together. Let's co-create, engage in the human capital side of the equation, and for sustainable growth of Africa, which in turn, I'm not. The reason why I get interested in Africa so much is the fact that Japan's a wealthy country, a lot of good things going. But if you talk to young Japanese in general, what's their future going to be like? And many of them aren't. Hopefully, it'll stay the same. But if you kind of talk to the young Africans, they're always looking up.
They want change.
They want positive change for a better tomorrow. And that is so important, I think. And this is something we had back 150, 80 years ago. Kind of lost it now, but it's kind of a long way around. But engaging with Africa, maybe that switch will come back on here in Japan. And the reason why I think that is because there are actually young Japanese working on the continent currently, and you meet them. A lot of them are women, actually. The men kind of give up early and they kind of come back, but the women are more sort of they
persevering.
Yeah. And they're really brilliant, and if even here in Japan, you talk to a large corporation who has no interest in Africa in terms of institutionally, but I find you can always find one individual that's really passionate about Africa, and those are the individuals I think that's so important, not just for Africa, but just for Japan in general, to find those kind of people, to trigger this, change.
So your career, originally working a lot with the United States, now you're looking southwest to Africa a lot, but you're still here in the center in Japan. And from everything you've told me, a lot of things need to be done, and a lot of these things require capital. And that's kind of where you and your companies kind of come into, to raise this capital, to be able to make this money flow for a positive impact on society.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of these challenges now? If you go back to Japan, you've been doing this for a few years, for you to kind of get all of these companies, get the governments on board for launching all these initiatives, which in the financial world, you always want to look of a return on investment. But I imagine the returns are clear, but also very hard to measure when and how will there be an impact if, for example, you institutionalize education and give access to universities. So how do you kind of then, if you come back to what you're doing and working on in Japan, the challenges of raising funds, basically?
Well, the challenge of specifically for Africa, but also for the alternative investments that I mentioned that I was starting my career, it's something new. And so for something new, people are always sort of thinking like, oh, we're not into that yet. No, thank you, kind of. But as I mentioned, there's always some individual that will champion that in a large organization. So finding that person, working with that right person, is the critical part.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the money is there, right? And basically, people understand that, we need to have risk return. We need to diversify the portfolio, all that kind of stuff. But to move it forward within the organization, somebody in that organization has to champion it. If I convince the top management says, oh, sounds good, why don't you just talk to my people, and you talk to the people and they go like, oh, it's coming from above, but that's interesting, but it's like, we've done, and so you get a lot of resistance, right? And if you go to the people first, and they go, oh, it sounds interesting, but our senior management will never, and that kind of that interaction happens all the time. But you always find some, I call them Jedi Knights, basically. Right? There's the sort of the status quo, the large evil empire. But you can always find Jedi Knights somewhere.
Resistance.
Yeah. And to me, change never happens in the center or the in the whole. It always happens at the edge, right? And the crack comes at the edge, and it kind of goes, and that's when it changes, right? And so trying to find that right person and give them that being able to give him that lightsaber, basically, some weapon
to break it open.
Yeah. And so might say it's like, I think my role in my looking back at my career, I called my company Shibusawa and Company, and the reason why I called it Shibusawa and Company is because, well, there's a McKinsey and Company, Bain and Company, so why not Shibusawa and Company? So that's where it started. But looking back, it was like Shibusawa and many different companies, and so my role is to actually connect. I think is my role, and so like connecting the social sector to the profit sector, connecting the past, the legacy of my great grandfather to the present. Currently, trying to do it in Japan with Africa, and so that's my role, trying to find the connections. And I wish I had all the capital in the world, so I don't have to convince people and say, hey, like, you can use this money. But like I said, my great grandfather didn't leave that part of the legacy. So
over your career, what kind of changes have you seen in this industry? I feel like the financial industry has a lot of stigma. Some of it may be true, some of it may be misconceptions. But with the change you're trying to implement, have you seen an institutional change as well with how these companies operate and approach things and kind of engage now with you, for example?
I think when I was joining the industry back in the 1980s, it was all transactional.
It was a very Western capitalist style.
Western capitalism. Well, so I worked for a Western capitalist company, so that a lot of the conversation would be around that. I think around from 2020, to be fair, I guess more in the 21st century going forward, finances become more holistic in a sense. Mm-hmm. With the ESG and whatnot, and impact. ESG is a dirty word now in the United States, unfortunately. But that it's like well, you need to have the financial returns, the financial disclosure, but also the non-financial return and non-financial disclosure. So it's become more holistic in globally, I think. Yeah, and in Japan, I think. Somewhere deep down, people kind of welcome that, because, like, as you're sort of mentioning, so Japan was doing good in its own way back until 1980, and then for the last three decades following, from 1990, Japan's being told, oh, you have to be more efficient. You have to, you're inefficient. You're not doing things the right way. You lack governance, And Japanese corporations and institutional investors and whatnot will say, "Oh, yes, I understand, but but we understand the shareholder, but we have employees, we have, our customers, we have our partners, we have the society, and we have responsibility, and so that kind of That's why we can't just look at just increasing the efficiency of capital, but it was all sort of kind of real weak rhetoric in a sense, and so the people on this side that says you're not making any sense, that's why Japan's falling behind, that kind of stuff. But now with this sort of re-emergence of being more holistic in terms of the environment, social, and now this movement towards impact, which means you have to have the intent, not just as a sided thing, but intent to have solutions to the environment and society. It's giving, I think, it's giving the lightsaber to some people, saying like, hey, this is what we think is important. This is how we disclose our information. So what do you think? which I'm not saying it's happening that way, but I think that's the way I think it is a potential. The tools are there actually to do that.
The tools are there, the money is there as well. You mentioned one of the big challenges will be the human capital, which was Japan's strength, but when talking about the younger generation in Japan, they're kind of hoping for no change, that it doesn't get worse, as opposed to working to improve it.
Yeah.
How do you then give this younger generation opportunities to kind of participate in this, to see the possibility for positive change?
Yeah, I think what's happening with the younger generation with the internet, they're the digital natives. And what's happening is I feel people that I come in contact with the younger generation, they're so brilliant. I mean, it's outrageously more capable, more motivated than I was ever when I was their age. And the reason is because they have the tools, digital tools to be able. But that's tip of the iceberg. I see them because they're active. That's why they come seeking me. And when I go somewhere, they're there.
They already want to change.
Yeah, so. Right. But that's this. And I think there's a segment of the population where they don't, it's just day by day kind of stuff, right? And in any way you can knock on their heads, you can kick, and it's like they won't change. And I think most of the bulk is sort of like in the middle with either they're asleep or their switches are off. And so if the environment is such that that I got woken up by some shock, and I think the COVID crisis actually was one thing that turned on the switch of many, not just young people, but many people around the world. And so I think this is the important zone, right? And so, and the thing is, myself in this zone, we don't have that much direct engagement, right? Because we're not in the same sphere. And so, but I think that's the important part of the equation. But if you think about it, it's not just the present digital age thing, because Eiichi, my great-great-grandmother, is like he has many interesting sayings. It's like, he was talking about this 130 years ago or something. He said like, we talk about how the young people in the past were more, active and more dynamic, and then the present meaning back in his area, right? But the truth is, even in the old days compared to 100, that they were good people, they were not so good people. And so, and the same for H's age, and the same for now. So it's like, in any age, any culture, any country, that kind of divide is always there. And so I think what's important is for this layer to be influencing this layer as well, right? But it's kind of difficult, because for this layer, it's like, these guys, they're just doing it because they want to show off. In Japan, they're called ishiki no takaike, high conscious people.
And it's not necessarily seen as a good thing.
Yeah. But there are some people on the fringe, I think, that kind of sees these people as sort of role models, in a sense. You need role models, right? If there wasn't anybody doing in there, everybody would give up, right? And so in that respect, I'm not so pessimistic about the future, because the environment's going to change, obviously, in a way that the younger people have more choices on what they can do. In the past, they didn't have a choice. They joined the company, and you have more choices, and choices are good, but for many people, it's a nuisance because they don't want to choose.
It can be a challenge. Yeah, there's too much choice paralysis.
Yeah. But that's the flip side. But then there are, but it's the part of this positive side is that, well, population here is dwindling, and so there'll be more need from the status quo part of the society saying like, hey, we need for you to come work for us.
There needs to be some change.
Yeah.
Your grandfather great-great-grandfather left a lot of archives, a lot of teachings, philosophy around how capitalism can work. Mm-hmm. When you're thinking about your work and what you're doing now, what would you like to leave behind, and for people to kind of see as this is also a possible way?
Yeah, well, just that I was able to nudge something a little bit forward, connect, as I mentioned, connect something so that for my children and children's generation, my grandchildren, future grandchildren generation, that they can use the baton that I'm passing on to them to do what they want to do. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that I think I would, if you're asking me how I want to be remembered by, it's not, but there were some things that I was able to start, the long-term investment, the social part, Africa, that I can't see it till the finish line probably, but there, it's out there.
And someone maybe, hopefully, will pick the baton and kind of pass it on and keep it going.
Yeah.
We covered a lot of topics so far. Is there anything that you would have liked to talk about or get into that maybe I didn't ask you about today?
Oh, okay. I forget what I talked about. I think Japan is in a new era. And the biggest part of it is because during what we call the Showa period, when I was born, when I was starting my career, it was basically a population bonus era, right? We talked about a little bit, younger people supporting the older people, that kind of social sort of structure. What happened during the lost decades of 30 years, 1990 to 2020, is basically, it wasn't a population pyramid, but it was a kind of a double barrel baby boomer, baby juniors, they're children. And for the 30 years, it kind of shifted upwards. And then what happens from 2020 is it goes reverse pyramid really, really fast. And so
accelerating.
I think we don't feel it every day here in Japan, but it's the biggest earthquake that the humankind has ever seen, in a sense, in terms of demographics changing at a scale, at another speed that we haven't experienced it before. So that's the environment where we Japanese society are in currently, and many of the other Western countries will follow. Not this Western, Asian country, even like Vietnam and even China will be eventually in the same trajectory. But we're this big guinea pig experiment.
How will it work? How will
because our status quo question or answer to growth was increase your population, which is more of a quantities game. And it was a very successful game in a sense, right? But now we have to shift from quantity to quality, not just the volume. And will that drive? How does that going to drive growth? How does that going to drive wealth and wellness, right? And so. It's a really interesting time to be in Japan. So I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here. There are a lot of interesting things happening, and
and we need, so in that, when things are changing, I think what we need is, in Japanese they go yosomono, wakamono, bakamono. Yosomono is people from outside, and so I'm a yosomono to the Kansai area because I live in Tokyo. But people from outside of the and wakamono is the young people, and bakamono is just people that basically are able to take risks. Is the way I look at it, and this is the same equation that happened back in the Meiji Restoration. If you think about it, back then, my great grandfather was a young man, very, very isolationist in a sense. But he, as a young man, he saw the outside world and thought, "Wow, this is happening," and he brought a lot of things back. But Japan back then used lots of technologies from the yosomono people outside of Japan, brought it in, and fine-tuned it. And frankly, there were bakamono people that took risks that says, that this society needs to change because of this. And that's the way Meiji Restoration happened, right? And so what do we need now is the same.
Yosomono, wakamono, and bakamono.
Yeah.
And this is how we can get hopefully positive change and a bright future here in Japan.
Yeah. And for the world. I mean, so for one last comment is, like, we have a new prime minister, Takaichi-san. We were born the same month of the same year. And so I can understand where she's coming from, because, like, okay, when we were teenagers, we were listening to Deep Purple and Black Sabbath and that kind of stuff. And when we were in our 20s, this is our 80s when Japan was booming. And then once we start getting our sort of alignment for what we do with our career in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, Japan was just fading, lost decades. And as we were turning 60, there's this sort of little nudge that maybe Japan's like finally emerging, waking up. And so her policy directives for a strong Japan, I 100% agree. Some of the policy implementations, we can have a longer conversation, and there's a lot of things I disagree. but that sort of premises, I agree 100%. But for a stronger Japan, it's not just Japan. It's like, so back in the Showa period, it was all about made in Japan, make in my country, ship it to your country. And we're so successful, mostly in the United States, mass consumption, mass production. U.S. got angry with us, bashing happened. And so we said, oh gosh, I'm sorry, we'll make it in your country, made by Japan. Very, very rational. But that was, that last decade started out with bashing. And after 30 years, it was Japan passing, right? Now I think we're in an era, I think we need a new business model in Japan. And it's not just made in Japan, made by Japan, but made with Japan, right? Made with the world. And so for Japan to be strong, we need a stronger world. And for a stronger world, we need a stronger global south. It's obvious. And Africa is not just Africa, but Africa is a big part of that. And so hopefully
opportunities ahead and paths for collaboration.
Yeah, right.
Ken Shibusawa, thank you so much for coming. I know you have a busy schedule, but you made a quick stop in our studio today on your way back to Tokyo. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your perspectives. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for sticking with us all the way till the end. We really appreciate it. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the podcast. It helps us improve the show and bring you more in-depth conversations from Japan. Take care and see you next time.